Hi, and welcome to VIBEZ Daily. This is a daily devotional curated by VIBEZ Church to help you practice the way of Jesus and be all that God has called you to be. You have joined us for our year-long series titled Devoted. Acts 2:42 tells us that the followers of Jesus were devoted to the apostles' teaching, to fellowship, to breaking of bread, and to prayer. This podcast was created to provide context and commentary for what you read each day. Just before our friends begin discussing today's reading, we want to invite you not only for fellowship, but for prayer as well. We have created the VIBEZ Daily Chat Group to offer you fellowship and a community where you can state your observations, ask questions about the reading or the podcast. You can join us by downloading the VIBEZ Church app in your favorite app store. Click Join the Conversation and join us today. And finally, we hope that you can join us for prayer. Prayer happens Monday through Friday, and more information on that can be found on the VIBEZ Church app under prayer. Now, let's begin our conversation on today's reading.
All right, welcome to day 17 of VIBEZ Daily in the Devoted series. I am back with my friends Collin, Shameeka, and my wife Victoria. So happy to see you guys again here. Hopefully this has been beneficial. We are halfway through this week and almost to the end of Genesis. We're going to cover 3 chapters today, chapters 42, chapters 43, and chapters 44. And although they are broken up in chapters, it's really kind of one story and one account that happens here. And so I like to remind us, when the Bible was originally written, it wasn't written in chapters. So this was all kind of just together written once. This just helps us to organize it. So we're just really going to kind of discuss it as a whole. We left off, Joseph has established what's going to take place during the 7 years of plenty versus the 7 years of famine. The 7 years of famine hit. He goes as far out beyond Egypt, but to the lands around them as well, right? And one of those lands happens to be his homeland, where his father and his brothers are, and that brings his brothers to Egypt. So as you guys looked at these chapters, 42, 43, 44, this kind of back and forth between, between Joseph and his brothers, what stuck out to you guys about this story?
For me, in the beginning, seeing how all the brothers went except for Benjamin, and so we're still seeing this favoritism that Jacob/Israel have over his children that came from Rachel, and now because Joseph isn't there, now it's being transferred over to Benjamin is his favorite child. So that was one of the first things that stuck out to me. But also Joseph is the governor. He's the one that is distributing this grain and partaking in the selling, and we're seeing prophecy be fulfilled. His brothers literally having to come to him in a time of need and to the point of bowing down. And we see this multiple times through the text of them bowing down to him. So I'm wow.
Yeah, I'm exactly with Shameeka on this one. Verse 3 is the thing that stuck out to me. Then 10 of Joseph's brothers, so we know a test is coming, the number 10. And I love how it goes from Jacob did not send Benjamin, and then it talks about Israel. And I think that verse 4 is the reason why Jacob didn't send Benjamin is because that's the last memory of Rachel he has left. And it just represents a piece of my past that I don't want to let go.
That's interesting as you said that he's referred to Jacob in verse 4 in this holding on to the past, and then it says that's the sons of Israel.
Exactly.
In verse 5. It's interesting. I think it's very interesting how he speaks to them. He speaks to them as if he's not caring. In the verse, he's why y'all look at one another? What are y'all doing? Just sitting around. You can see that there's not this same love and embrace. He's no, they're expendable. What y'all doing? Go get us some food.
Yeah.
And so I just think even just the way he speaks to them. But to me, it's also her second point that I feel just right here in verse 6, they come, they bow down to him just like the dream. And then in verse 13, they even say themselves, we your servants, and so even there, they are literally fulfilling this dream that they were so angry about, which to me is sometimes we might get so angry about things that we don't understand. Right? But it's literally God ordained, like Eric was saying before.
Yeah. That's good. Yeah, it definitely does seem to be a disregard for the safety of the other 10, which had to be a pattern, right? Because even as they go back and forth, and he refuses to allow Benjamin to go, there. But if I'm one of the other brothers, I'm like, but you let us go. Like, you so worried about his life, but not worried about ours specifically. But yeah, I thought it was just very interesting. I really juxtapose this story of forgiveness, which ultimately we will get to at some point, versus like Esau's. Like, we talked about before last week that like Esau forgiving Jacob, that was like one of the first examples we really get of forgiveness in scripture. And it was like instantaneous and like unconditional, right? Like, he prepared to meet his brothers, and maybe he had more time to kind of think about the fact that he was going to forgive his brothers, right? Joseph doesn't know they're coming, but it was instantaneous. There was no game. There was no, any of that. It was just flat out, you're forgiven, essentially, right? He doesn't say those words, but like, he just embraces him. And I think it's so interesting that Joseph needs more time to like work through what he feels, right? Is the way I kind of interpret this. And that it seems as if there's, Dr. Tony Evans was the first one to kind of point this out to me in one of the books I read of his, that like, there are really two types of forgiveness. There's, forgiveness that's essentially dependent upon remorse, right? Like, I'm waiting for you to say sorry, and, you saying sorry helps me process and get to that. And then there's forgiveness that's independent of your remorse. You may never say sorry, but I've forgiven you and I've let you go. And it almost feels as if like Esau's was independent of whether Jacob said sorry or not. Like, I've already forgiven you. Yeah. And Joseph seemed like he wanted more remorse. Like, he wanted to see, like, have you guys really changed? Yes. Like, are you really different before I extend my forgiveness to you? For sure. And I just feel like it was a difference in how that played out. And I don't know to say right or wrong, but I think for me it's helpful as a person, who has been hurt and things of that nature, as we all have in certain different points of our life, to see different examples of how forgiveness is played out so that we can know what we're striving for as well in our lives.
Absolutely. Yeah, I definitely noticed that, like, it just seemed like a bunch of games that was being played with Joseph, and a lot of extra things and like measures that were being taken. And I felt like it was I'm trying to see their hearts. Like, it's been who knows how long now, like, since he's seen them. We just previously talked about how like the Lord helped him to forget like his family and stuff, and so I'm sure it was a shock to see them, but also it did seem like he wanted to check their character and see, like, okay, let me check the fruit. Like, is this really true? Are you guys still how you were when I last saw you? But I feel like I've already seen a difference in them, because before, where the brothers would have been jealous of Joseph's favoritism, they're not like that towards Benjamin. Like, we see Benjamin get special treatment even with Joseph, and they're not like over there like, oh my gosh, like, see, here we go again kind of thing. Like, they didn't say nothing about it. They dealt with it. And I don't know if that has to do with, is Benjamin the youngest brother? I don't know if it has something to do with like him being the baby of the family, but I do see already their hearts being different towards this favoritism that their dad is showing to a brother.
One thing I want to point out is in verse 8, although Joseph recognized his brothers, they did not recognize him. And I think we can't miss the magnitude of this moment, because Joseph has almost become fully Egyptian at this point. And later on in the story, it says that he even has to bring in a translator because he doesn't speak the same language. And I think that the important thing to note here is that persecution, in a sense, leads to transformation. And what Joseph sees is like, he's been enduring changes his whole life, but the only person who's changed is him. That his brothers look the same, his entire family looks the same, and sometimes we shy away from advancement in the kingdom, but it actually shows us that like Joseph needed to change because his family was never going to change. So if he would have stayed where he was, he never would have been transformed.
Yeah, it's good. Anything else? Throughout 42, 43, there's some back and forth with Israel and the sons on whether Benjamin was allowed to go back. Anything else that you guys just thought was interesting kind of in this encounter with his brothers?
I was gonna say that like Benjamin really held a special place in Joseph's heart. Like for him, that is his full brother.
Mm-hmm.
They have the same mom and dad, but like how he really like was enthused to really meet Benjamin. Like he out of all the brothers, like that's who he really wanted to see.
Yeah.
And so the measures that he did take to ensure that like he could see his brother, it was almost like for him that was like his last dying wish. Like I just want to see my brother. Like so yeah, the measures that he took for that was interesting.
Yeah, I think I do notice just back to, we mentioned this, I want to say on Monday, but we're back to Judah again, kind of being an intercessor here, someone that's trying to step in and make something happen. So this is in 43 now, verse 8, where it says, Judah said to his father Israel, send a boy with me, we will be on our way so that we may live and not die. Neither we nor you nor our dependents. I will be responsible for him. You can hold me personally accountable, right? So he's trying to step in and be accountable for the life of Benjamin and ultimately really the life of his entire family, as he mentions. Like, this was necessary for them to live. He was like, we have to do this. We have to be able to take Benjamin back because otherwise we're all going to die out here anyway. And so I just seeing Judah in that place as intercessor, an intermediary between his family. I thought it was interesting to see that happen again.
Yeah. And to see, like, now we are referring to Jacob as Israel in the text and seeing, like, in verse 14, how Israel is, like, going to God and asking for God's mercy, like, and, like, pretty much saying a prayer, whereas before, like, we saw the journey of his life where he was so, like, halfway in, halfway out, and only revering God in certain situations. But we do see this transformation happen even in Israel's life and heart, where it's like, okay, this is my son who I love dearly, but may God's like presence be with him.
Yeah. Well, I love how in like verse 18 of chapter 42, Joseph he acknowledges still that he still fears God, right? Mm-hmm. He's like, do this and you'll live and I'll fear God. But I think it's really interesting in chapter 43, that even one of his servants, one of his servants says in verse 23, like, peace to you, do not be afraid. Your God and the God of your father has put treasure in your sacks. And so I wonder if Joseph's rhetoric throughout these years has, gods weren't formed, right? They all had different gods, but I think even just this knowledge of like, okay, your God and the God of your father must have done this. Like, I don't know if he was playing with them or not, but like, just maybe even possible that Joseph's belief in Yahweh, this God, was something that has like resonated as a one and true God over, not one and true God, but at least a prominent God that the Israelites the Egyptians actually recognize now. Because before, it wasn't even recognized as a God.
Yeah, I think I love that you called that out, because this was probably the first time I recognized this verse this way, verse 23. Specifically the last line that you didn't say here, where he said, I received your silver. Because I think for the first time, like I said, it stuck out to me that ultimately, their debt was settled, right? It wasn't a situation where they were looking for this silver and they're like, oh, thanks for bringing it back. We were looking for that. But despite the fact that they received their silver back, their debt was still settled, right? According to this person. And that, like, the steward was clear, like, no, there's no balance. There's no, no debt. Nothing is due. And I feel like when I read that, this week, again, it's hard not to, it's just as a follower of Jesus, like, it's hard not to read all of scripture and just point back to Jesus. Like, that's just, I'll be honest, when I'm reading, like, that's usually where my head is. And I do see this, like, again, symbolism of just like, your debt is paid on your behalf, and you didn't have to pay anything, right? Like, ultimately, they didn't have to pay. They got the silver back. They didn't have to give anything, but according to whom it was due, like, it was already paid. on behalf, essentially by Joseph. And so, I don't know, for whatever reason, that verse stuck out to me this week, uniquely in a way that, again, I've read this story who knows how many times, and I've never really paid attention to that line.
Yeah.
I think the passage that stuck out to me was in verse 32 when they're having the feast, how that Joseph still hasn't made himself known, but he still establishes order in the seating arrangements. And in the sense, like, the Hebrews were able to eat with the Egyptians, but they were still set apart. And how at the end, how Benjamin, one of the Hebrew boys, gets 5 times more than anyone else, including the Egyptians. And I think, kind of back to what Victoria was saying before, it was like, even the Israelites reading this, they're literally communing with Egyptians, but it's like God still has his hand on the Israelites. Like, the Israelites came to borrow from the Egyptians, but they came out of Egypt with more than they went in with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's good. Good. Anything else? I mean, we've kind of gotten through, at this point, like through 43. Anything in this final test right here in 44 that you guys thought was interesting?
So we kind of talked about this yesterday, but here's the text that we see where Joseph is referring to divination. And part of me, like, I even wrote in my side and I was like, okay, is he bluffing? Like, part of me felt like he was bluffing towards his brother, but at the end of the day, we really don't know. Like, if he had been, dibbling and dabbing in divination at all. But I do feel like it was, again, like this known thing or custom, and especially if he's still trying to disguise himself as not being the brother, then it would be fitting that if you guys think that I am, Egyptian, and like, I would say this because this is typically our custom and what we would do. So yeah, I personally want to believe that he was just bluffing. Yeah. Like, he wanted to just point out the severity of, like, hey, I got a way of knowing, like, you can't get over on me. On things. So
because say right now, God is the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Like, he's very specific in who, and to them, like, who he even speaks to, right? So maybe even saying that he speaks to Yahweh, their God. It's like, wait a minute, what? You're Egyptian,
right?
It's possible, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I would say one of the things that just, we talked a little bit about Judah kind of interceding, and he does it again here when he prays on behalf of Benjamin. But I was struck that, like, I love Joseph's heart in that he didn't see the way that that Judah and their brothers defended Benjamin as, like, an insult to him. Like, I think that sometimes we can find it difficult when someone will do for others what they did not do for us, right? And envy, or be jealous of, or kind of have issue and take issue with those people, when instead Joseph actually looked at that as a sign of growth and a sign of remorse on behalf of his brothers, to say, the fact that you stuck up for Benjamin in the way that you didn't stick up for me, 13, 15 years ago, whatever it is at this point, the fact that you were able to do that, man, like, that shows that you've grown, that you're different now, versus looking at it as, well, you could have kept me from going to the pit, right? Or you could have not sold me into slavery. He looked at it and instead said, okay, that's a sign of growth. And I think it's a challenge for us to not be envious or jealous of what is done for others, simply because it may not have been done for us, even by the same person, but to just really see it from that perspective, I thought was very interesting.
Yeah. Into, like, it was in chapter 42 where his brother said, like, where your servants are honest men. Like, it did show that, one, they have changed and grown, but they're living up to that, to what they're saying about themselves. So I do think it was an opportunity for Joseph to see that as well, that like, okay, they're honest, and like look at what they were willing to do and sacrifice for their brother.
You know, it's so hard for me to not think of Benjamin as a child here.
Yeah.
But to me, sometimes I often think that, like, this is little boy Benjamin, you know, running behind his brothers. And, but when we actually get to chapter 46 tomorrow, you'll see that, like, Benjamin has, like, a gang of sons. Like, he has offspring at this point that come with him into Egypt. And I'm like, he's probably a grown man. Like, and the fact I'm just thinking of like how Joseph and him like were weeping together, and how Jacob is like, nah, Benjamin can't go with y'all. Like, it kind of makes it feel like he's this little boy. But probably this grown man that Jacob's protecting, right? And this grown man that like Joseph is weeping over, and they're hugging and weeping. And when he got 5 portions more, at first I was just like, can he even eat all of that? He's only a grown man, right? Because he has all these kids. And we know they start younger than we do these days, but still.
Yeah, I mean, you can do the math, right? Like, we say he's 30 when he enters. Joseph is when he enters the Pharaoh. There's 7 years of plenty first, right? So he's at least 37 before the famine even starts. And so, you know, it's likely he's in his 40s, or at least just, you know, that early part of his 40s by the time his brothers even show up, right?
Yeah, because so, 2 years into the famine.
Right, and then they go back to Egypt, right? I mean, back to Canaan. They go back to Canaan. And they live off of that food as long as they possibly can. They don't come back to Egypt until they're out of food again, right? Yeah. So, like, there's a lot of time that has passed. And just off of, just that basic math, he's at least a legal adult by our standards, right? Even if he was 1 when Joseph left, which we know that not to be true. But even if he was, we definitely know he's an adult at this point. Yeah. Anything else that jumps out to you guys here? His encounter with his brothers. Good. All hearts and minds clear. All right. Well, look, it was a shorter episode today, but really appreciate you guys joining us. Come back tomorrow, another 3 chapters. We will get to see Joseph reveal himself to his brothers and kind of go from there. But we'll see you all tomorrow.
Thank you for joining us for the VIBEZ Daily podcast. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform, or download our favorite, the VIBEZ Church app. Visit vibes.church/devoted for additional episodes, notes, details, and the latest merch. Join us next time as we continue